is Howard. I'm 25 years old, and I live on my family's farm. I help take care of it when my parents are out of town. It's just a little family farm, not a commercial farm or anything like that. My parents want me to take it over when they're too old to take care of it anymore, as I'm the oldest of 3 and the only son. But honestly, I don't really want to. I don't see myself staying in the middle of Arkansas my whole life, and especially not after something really weird that happened only last July. My parents were on a romantic trip for a week, and so it was my 2 sisters, Crystal and Morgan, and I taking care of the property while they were gone. There's not much around here, lots of privacy and such, a little too much in my opinion. Except for this one night. It started later on in the night, as it was approaching time to go to bed. My sisters do college online. Crystal takes summer courses, and so she was in her room on her laptop doing work. Morgan and I were just hanging out watching some dumb show in the living room. All 3 of us kind of want to get out of the farm lifestyle. Me especially, since I'm oldest and in the prime of my 20s. One dreaded part of farm life is the predators, though. Not just the animals that come and eat your produce, but the people that come and steal from you. Believe it or not, it happens. It hasn't happened many times to us, but it does happen. We have a few guns in the house for this exact reason. Our 2 dogs outside suddenly started going crazy in the backyard. Something spooked them for sure. I first thing went outside to the yard to see what they were barking at. They both were looking in the direction of the crops, going crazy. I yelled at them to shut up and they went quiet. I stepped right in front of the crops and listened. I heard a whistling from inside of the cornfield. It was undoubtedly a human's whistling. This was the first time I was experiencing a trespasser on the property with my dad not here. I had to hurry inside to get one of the guns. The dogs started barking again. I told my sisters that someone's outside in the cornfield and I had to go chase them away. They both said that was a terrible idea to go run into the cornfield in the dark, and they knocked some sense into me when I realized they were right. I also realized how downright terrifying that would be. So instead, I went out back to the dogs, once more going crazy, barking in the direction of the crops. I aimed the gun into the air and fired off a shot which echoed into the night, silencing the dogs. I also was on some kind of power trip in the moment and screamed out to get off our land as loud as I could. I felt that would have done the trick and went back inside. My sisters were both laughing, which caused me to laugh too. But our little laugh amongst each other didn't last long, because the dogs started going crazy again, even crazier this time. I went back outside, ready to do the same thing again. But I felt my heart skip a beat when I saw the guy standing about 20 feet from the dogs, right in front of the cornfield. He looked at me, and I screamed, "Hey!" At which point he ran into the cornfield. I started running over and fired another shot into the air. I stopped by the dogs. There was no chance in hell I was going in there. I wasn't about to leave the dogs out here either. I unclamped their chains from the hooks and brought them inside the house. I told my sisters someone was sneaking around in the cornfield. So what did we do? We called our dad. He told me I had to be the man of the house and protect my sisters. He recommended I fire another warning shot outside if whoever it was came back. After this, we all just gradually went to our respective rooms. My sisters each brought one of the dogs in their rooms, and I brought the gun in my room, just because we were all a little spooked by this. I had the window open, and as I was laying in bed watching a movie on my laptop, I heard a whistling from outside. I hurried to the window and looked out to see someone slowly walking in the grass. Then, like he had some sixth sense, he stopped walking and turned to look at my window, still whistling. This jerk was obviously trying to mess with us and scare us, a very stupid idea when I already made it clear I had a gun. I ran to grab the gun off the bed and aimed it out the window. I shot at the grass a few feet away from him, purposely missing, of course. This cut his little horror movie act short, and he ran out of view of my window towards the front of the house. This time he didn't come back. He'd have to be a fool to come back after that. I obviously told my sisters why I shot, and I assured them he would not be coming back. We never found out who it was or why. It could have been some teen or multiple teens just trying to scare some innocent farmers for fun, or it could have been an actually dangerous person. I used to work as a night restock worker at a supermarket in a somewhat rural town. The store was called Great American. It was the biggest and best supermarket in the area. My shift would be as soon as the store would close at 10. I'd work from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. the latest, restocking the shelves and organizing everything before the next operating day. I of course had the keys to the store for the after hours. It would be a team of two, myself and one other, either Terry, Carter, or Alfonso. Tonight I was supposed to be working with Terry. I arrived to the store and let myself into the back where all the inventory yet to be stocked was. I started my work using the pallet jack to bring a whole pallet of boxes out to the shopping floor. I started with the bread and nut aisle, rotating the older loaves in the front and putting the new loaves in the back. It grew faster than usual, and I found the boxes as I went, leaving the pallet of boxes out to the shopping floor. I started with the bread and nut aisle, rotating the back. Halfway through, I realized I hadn't seen Terry yet. I walked to the back area of the store where the inventory was, where we'd leave our belongings. He wasn't back there yet. I left the back door cracked open with the door stopper for him when he would show up. So I went back to work for another half hour. And with still no sign of Terry, I once again went to the back of the store. He wasn't in there, but I noticed the back door was shut. I assumed that meant Terry was here somewhere. I went to open the back door and saw the door stopper was outside, which I thought was weird that he kicked it outside instead of bringing it in. I called Terry's name and it echoed through the room. He didn't call back, so I decided to call him. He picked up sounding like he was in bed, and I asked him if he was at work. He said he wasn't coming in tonight because he was sick. Suddenly I got the chills. I told him someone kicked the door stopper off the door, and he said it could have just come undone itself. Nobody else was scheduled to work that night. I told him feel better, and we hung up. I wasn't sure if I was convinced that the door stopper came undone itself, because I kicked it under the door pretty tightly. I did a quick look around just to make sure no one was in the back of the store, and when I didn't see anyone, I went back to work, though I felt a slight sense of unease the whole time. I was stalking the remainder of the bread when I heard a loud sound echo from across the shopping floor. Okay, now someone had to be in here. I got off my knees and went to the middle aisle that intersected all the other aisles. I looked straight down the aisle and stood there for a hot second. And all the way on the opposite side of the store, in the dairy aisle, a man dressed in black walked past the middle aisle, looking down in my direction. I felt my heart drop. It felt like that scene from the movie Signs where the alien walks past the birthday party. I had to think logically that maybe this was someone else filling in for Terry's shift that our boss didn't tell me about. I started to speed walk down the center aisle and yelled, "Excuse me," very loudly. I looked to the left down every aisle I passed since he went towards the front of the store. In one of those aisles, he was waiting at the end of it, standing there, fully facing my direction. When he saw me, he walked out of sight in the direction I was just coming from. I yelled "excuse me" again and started to run down that aisle to catch up to him. I didn't get a good look at his face yet. When I got to the front of the aisle by the cash registers, I looked down the direction he went, and I saw him all the way at the end by the bread aisle. Half his body was hidden behind the shelf. His mouth was hanging open, and he started to wave me over, but he didn't say anything. His face was freaking me out. I attempted one more time to speak to him and said, "Who are you?" And he disappeared behind the shelf. I wasn't being paid enough for this. I went outside to sit in my car and call my boss. He picked up and I told him there was some random freak roaming around the store. He told me to get him out of there if I can, or call the police to get him out. I was not going to attempt to physically remove a crazy person from the store, so I called 911 and waited in my car until a police car showed up. I greeted the officer and asked him to follow me inside. We walked around the place looking for the man, and we saw him at one of the aisles again, creepily standing there again as if playing a game. When the police officer commanded him to come here, he actually listened. He was put in handcuffs and he was the strangest man I'd ever seen. He kept smiling and looking at me non-stop, licking his lips. He had huge bags under his eyes. The only words he spoke were when answering the police officer, saying he was looking for a snack. I didn't like the way he was looking at me as the police officer was walking him back outside to his car. It was this menacing, threatening smile that I haven't forgotten to this day. I continued my work after that. Needless to say, I never left any of the doors open again. A long time ago, I'm talking like 8 years ago, 2 friends and I, James and Sean, did something really stupid. But at the time, doing stupid things was what we did to pass the time. We're not really friends with James anymore, but Sean and I still talk often, and so oftentimes we'll talk with each other about this story. We were 19 years old. We lived in bumfuck New Jersey. Lots of vacant houses in our old town, and atop a hilly road not far from our houses was an abandoned church. Locals knew about the church. It was on a closed-off road, and it had been abandoned for many years. I'm not sure if it's still standing or what the current state of it is, as I live in Florida now, but James, Sean, and I, being the troublemaking thrill-seekers we were, came up with this genius plan of bringing a Ouija board to the church late one night. This was October, so I guess we were doing it in honor of spooky season. Sean had the Ouija board in his closet, so we brought it. I drove the 3 of us, so I first picked up James, then Sean, and we just drove straight towards the church. Since the road up the hill to the church was literally blocked off, we had to park on the side of the road and walk from there. We followed the road up the hill to the church, using one flashlight at first, so as not to overdo it and draw any possible attention. But once we were atop the hill, we pretty much all 3 of us turned on our flashlights. The church was surrounded by woods in basically all directions and had a gravel parking lot alongside it. The church had been broken into a million times before and was littered with graffiti, so the big front door was already ajar. 2 of us had to work together to pull it open, because it scraped on the floor though. Once inside, we naturally just looked around the place with our flashlights to make sure no one else was in there. It was definitely creepy being in that place at night. Sean set up the Ouija board. Then he pulled out these 3 candles from his backpack as well, and he left and said it would add to the experience. He placed the 3 candles in a triangle formation around the board, and as they were all lit, we turned off our flashlights. Now the only light in the whole place was from the candles, creating a much more eerie and uncomfortable vibe. We really couldn't see more than maybe 6 feet in all directions, so we began playing with the Ouija board. Sean was doing most of the talking. At this point I can't remember exactly what he said, but he definitely opened with "Is anybody there?" and the typical cliche Ouija board questions. The planchette started to move, and we started to laugh. I knew it was one of them doing it. I feel like it's not possible to play with a Ouija board with your friends without someone jokingly moving around the planchette. We went along with it though, and whoever was moving it spelled out a few words. As this was going on though, we heard a weird crack-type sound come from the altar of the church. Best way I could describe it is it sounded like a big piece of wood cracking in half. It was loud, and it sounded like it was done by someone. We all jumped in reaction and hurried to shine our phones' flashlights in the direction of the altar. There was no one there, as far as we could see. I think both of them were just as freaked out as I was after that, but the place was old and falling apart, so some weird noises here and there didn't seem that crazy, and so we kept going. We all took turns asking the board questions, but the planchette was no longer moving. I think because that crack sound freaked all three of us out, and now we were taking it more seriously. This went on for some time, until another sound from the altar area broke the silence again. But before we even had time to shine our lights over there again, something landed on the Ouija board, causing all of us to jump and scream. It was a rock, about the size of a golf ball. All three of us just had our hands on the planchette 2 seconds ago, and there was no way any of us could have done that. We all three got up and ran back out of the church, screaming, leaving the Ouija board and candles behind. We ran all the way down the hill and back to my car, and fearing we were being chased, we didn't stick around. I drove us all back to James's house, where we just sat in the car for a good half hour talking, wondering what exactly just happened. Sean is very religious and superstitious as well. He was confident we had reached a spirit of some kind. I don't really believe in any of that stuff. I believe there was someone else in the church with us, which I find to be equally terrifying. Sean went back to the church the next day with James to get his Ouija board back. And to make things even stranger, the Ouija board was missing, but the candles were still in place. When they saw it was missing from the entrance, they decided to just leave right away. This remains to be the single scariest experience of my life. Years ago, I did the night shift at a gas station because I was strapped for cash and needed a second job. I worked the night shift there for a few months. It was around my second or third month that this guy started regularly coming in really late at night, always around 2 a.m. He was about 6 feet tall. He had long, stringy hair. He'd always come in, buy a tall boy, and leave. But after a while, he one night asked me my name. I told him my name, and he just kept saying, "Rob, I like that," as he'd laughed to himself. He cracked open the tall boy he'd just bought and walked out of the store talking to himself. He was clearly hammered. This was the night I was curious to see if he had been drinking and driving every single time that he'd come to the store. I watched as he left, and he walked out of sight off the gas station property. That would make sense. He never once bought gas any time he came in. He'd always just buy alcohol. I'd seen him just about every night after that for a while. He'd come in, some nights noticeably drunker than others, and sometimes he'd just lean on one of the shelves for a while and not say anything. He'd always greet me with a "Hey Rob" anytime he'd come in. One night he was just leaning on a shelf, drinking the tall boy he just bought, not saying anything, just staring at a wall. I asked him for his name finally. He looked at me, took about 5 seconds, and said, "Bob." Now, I always felt like Bob is a go-to fake name when you're lying about your name. I wondered if the first thing that came to mind for him was Bob because it rhymes with my name. But I went with it. I said, "So Bob, where do you work?" He laughed so loud it actually startled me. He said he doesn't work. He said the government completely fucked him out of his job. I got the vibe he was wasted again. He looked at me with an angry-looking face but interestingly said, "I like you, Rob. You seem like you know what you're doing." I didn't know what that meant, but he walked out of the store right after that. So, I didn't see him again for a while. I'd say over a week passed, which for a regular like him was a while. Bob always gave me this off, mildly creepy vibe. I figured he was usually drunk, but something was obviously wrong in his personal life. Well, one very stormy night, with less customers than usual, likely because of the storm, I heard the ding of the front door as someone answered, and I swear, before looking, imagined it to be Bob. And when I looked, I was shocked to see it was actually him, but it was a much scarier version of Bob. He was completely soaked. He wasn't wearing a rain jacket or using an umbrella. He was just in a dark shirt and jeans. His long hair was drenched, and he was just standing by the door looking straight ahead at the wall. He looked like he was angry, and yet his mind was elsewhere, like his thoughts were running. The way he was standing there blankly, staring at nothing, completely soaked, it was freaking me out. I said, "Bob, are you okay?" He didn't turn his head or move. He stood still and said, "I did something really bad." I asked, "What did you do?" He then looked at me, said, "I need somewhere to hide," then walked past me at the register towards the little restroom hallway. He disappeared behind the wall, and I heard one of the doors open and close. I was genuinely getting uncomfortable with Bob now. I didn't enjoy his presence whenever he was in the store, and tonight something was extra off about him. He seemed like a zombie, and that "I did something really bad" comment was incredibly creepy. Some time passed, and Bob never came out from the bathroom. I assumed he was wasted again, probably passed out or puking. Either way, I didn't want to intervene, and then the next thing I remember, the lights to the place cut out, and the store was completely dark. I was standing in a pitch-dark gas station during a major storm with an unhinged drunk man. I used the flashlight from behind the counter to make my way towards the back of the store, by the inventory storage and the panel board. The door to the back was in the same little hallway as the restrooms. As I walked by the two restroom doors, both of them were ajar, and Bob wasn't in either of them. I went through the door to the back. I was planning on going straight to the panel board, but I stopped when I heard a slight dripping in the room somewhere, and the squeaking of wet shoes. My heart sank into my stomach. I said, "Bob," in a very weak and scared voice. I heard squeaks right to my left. I heard squeaks right to my left. When I pointed my flashlight in that corner, there was Bob with his eyes open wide, and he lunged at me and started screaming, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." I pushed him off of me as he was clawing at my back. I ran back through the door to the front of the store. He didn't follow me. I grabbed my rain jacket and ran straight to my car. I sat in my car as I dialed 911 and spoke to an operator. I stayed on the line with her, and it didn't take long for a couple police officers to arrive and go inside with me. Bob was still hiding in the back room, huddled in a corner, apparently like some rabid creature. His pupils were huge. I only noticed it then. He was on something. They took him to the station after I told them that he'd launched at me, threatened to kill me, and stated that he did something really bad earlier. I found out over a month later that this Bob guy's real name was Martin, and he had brutally beaten his ex-wife to death. It might have happened on that same night that he came into the gas station. Long story short, I never wanted to work another night shift at any job ever again after this night. When I was 19 years old, I was still working at a nearby pizza place to help pay for food and gas and stuff. The job was always pretty easy, just taking the order, boxing up the food when it's done, putting it in a bag, and driving it to the given address. I'd done it a million times before, and nothing weird ever happened. It was very repetitive. Tips would usually be around $3, $5, depending on the distance. Sometimes more generous people would give 10 or more though. I remember this order was just a chicken parm hero and a regular slice. Smaller orders like this usually yielded lesser tips, but I didn't have a choice in which deliveries I did. I was on my way to the address, and of course the house was apparently on a dead-end block. This block had a more rural feel to it than the rest of the neighborhood. But, one of the houses had an RV sitting on the grass with a small patch of woods next to it. The other houses looked like little farmhouses. There was a lot more space on this particular street. And then I pulled up to the address. It was this small, weird-looking house with a huge property though. It sat next to what appeared to be an abandoned house with overgrown grass and shrubs. It was probably around 6 p.m. and it was getting pretty dark out, so it was around the time people would start putting on their lights inside their houses. But all the lights in the house were off, and I noticed the front door seemed cracked open. I began to walk over to the front door and I heard a piano being played. It sounded like it was a couple rooms away, at least muffled by some walls or a door or something. I knocked on the door and then rang the bell after a few minutes. Only the doorbell didn't work. The piano was still playing. I felt weird just walking in, so I walked around the property towards the back. The backyard was a literal mess. Things scattered all over the grass. There was a I even saw a broken, rusty chain link fence just sitting in the middle of the yard. I went to the back door and knocked really loud. I looked through the glass of the door and saw nothing except for what looked like a really messy storm room. Clearly, these people were not neat freaks, to say the least. When nobody answered the back door either, I went back around front and called one of the guys of the pizzeria to confirm the address with him. He took a second to check what he wrote down, and he confirmed that I was at the correct address. So I went back to the front door, pushed it open, and heard the creepy-sounding piano music still playing. I yelled, "Pizza's here!" The piano stopped. Someone yelled, "Over here!" Then the piano resumed. They were playing this simple, yet creepy, repetitive song as if on loop. There were also no lights on in this house, so it was almost hard to see in there. I walked straight, getting closer to the sound of the music. The smell inside the house was very musty and off-putting. When I got halfway into, I guess what you'd call the foyer, I felt very uncomfortable. I wasn't going to go any further. I yelled by the front door, "Sir!" The music stopped, this time for good, and now there was just silence. I backed towards the door again so that I would be closer to the outside. I was expecting the ear footsteps coming towards me, but no, it was just dead silent. I said, "Sir?" And a voice from another room said, "Yes, sorry, I have trouble walking. Could you just bring it in here, please?" I asked, "What room are you in, sir?" And he took a moment to answer back, "If you just walk through the living room, I'm in the dining room." There were no directions on the phone to do any of this, so this was very strange. I thought for a second about my next course of action. I felt bad, leaving in the case that this was some old feeble man just living in a messy house. I started walking through the living room. There was an opening that led to what I presumed to be the dining room. Me, being my overly cautious and paranoid self, was still suspicious. Instead of walking straight into the dining room, I peeked around the wall just enough for one eye to see into the room. I saw the piano, but there was no one sitting at it. I also didn't see anyone in the entire room. With that, I quietly but quickly walked back towards the front door, shut the door behind me, and drove back to the pizzeria. I explained that I got a sketchy vibe inside the house. My boss was completely understanding, especially when the alleged customer didn't call back asking why I left. That said everything. I didn't really understand the logic in trying to commit a robbery in your own house, nor did my boss or coworkers. So later that night after work, I looked up that address, and that house was foreclosed on months ago, and it had been vacant. When I told this to everyone, they had the same mouth-dropping reaction I did. I was truly mere steps away from probably getting robbed. That, or someone was trying to play a horrible prank on an unsuspecting pizza delivery guy.